Welcome, Lisa Lenard Cook.
Hi, Doris.
Well, Lisa, you're the author of 2 successful novels, and you are a widely known speaker and writing teacher. Tell us about your latest book, The Mind of the Story. What do you mean, the mind of the story?
The Mind of Your Story will be coming out in April of 2008 from Writer's Digest Books. And The Mind of Your Story really evolved from my Authorlink columns. It was a phrase I gave to describe pacing. Just like the human mind, a story exists in its present moment that keeps on ticking, and it also exists in its past and in its future. And so the mind of your story is concerned with how you can move around in a story's mind and keep it true to its pacing. That's the center part of the book, part 2 of the book. The first part of the book concerns fictional seeds and where fiction comes from and how a writer can turn obsession into fiction. And the last part of the book is concerned with revision and rewriting.
Well, how does one plant the fictional seeds?
I think that any fiction writer is going to be by nature an obsessional creature, someone who things get stuck in, I'm going to use her, stuck in her head and she can't get them out. So let's say she sees something by the side of the road as she's driving down the street, and something about it she's just going to start thinking about, and she's going to go and spin her wheels over and over. What I do is take that seed when I realize I'm going to make myself nuts with it, and I do what I call throwing it over to right brain. I just throw it over, and by saying to myself, I've done that, I don't obsess about it anymore. Now, for most people, a piece of paper is going to work a whole lot better. They'll write it down and then put it in a fishbowl or put it in a box or just get it out of the way. But a lot of beginning writers begin to write with only one seed. And that's a big mistake. You need at least 3 of these seeds, usually unrelated, to really begin writing a fiction that's going to connect with readers. So what happens is I keep throwing these seeds over to right brain, and what happens is when a third one connects with 2 others, a voice will start talking to me and I will start writing.
So you think 3 seeds?
3 seeds before you really should begin writing. So a lot of times a writer will think, oh, this is such a great idea, and they'll start writing and writing, and suddenly, bleep, they run out. And they can't figure out what to do next. But if you wait until 3, as in dissonance, okay, I had music theory, the concentration camp Teresian, which was a special concentration camp for artists and musicians and writers, and then the third one, Los Alamos, New Mexico, struck those 2, and out came this voice that just started telling me her whole story. And so music theory, a concentration camp, Los Alamos, how are those connected? Well, they're not. But for the fiction, they connect in just the way it needs to make the story blossom.
I see. What motivates you to write and to teach?
Well, to write, I was born apparently with a pen in my hand, and the main thing that makes me write is what I don't know. Okay, that sounds counterintuitive, and it's against everything we're taught. But I would ask a lot of questions when I was a little girl, and I drove everybody crazy. And they would say, you don't want to know about that, or we're not talking about that. There are so many stories that we never know the ends to, or even what made them happen in the first place. And so I made things up. If no one would tell me what really happened, I had to know the narrative anyway. And so I have made up things to make things fit together my entire life. So part of it is knowing what I can't know and making things work, and making not necessarily happy endings, but having a narrative that follows a narrative arc and concludes in some way. As for teaching, I didn't write for a number of years for reasons not worth going into. And after I had started writing again, we were living in LA County, and there was an ad in the paper for someone to teach computer applications and introduction to microcomputers at the community college. And I said to my husband, I can do that. And I was working at a flight test outfit up in Mojave, me and 20 men, which was a lot of fun. And he said, well, if you can do it, apply. And I applied, and I got the job. So I was teaching 2 computer courses at a community college, and discovered I was in my late 30s, that I loved teaching. And I said, I love teaching, but I don't want to teach introduction to microcomputers. And he said, well, what do you want to teach? I said, I want to teach writing. And he said, well, what do you have to do that? And I said, well, I suppose you need a graduate degree in writing. He said, well, how do you do that? And so I found out, and I went to Vermont College, a non-residential MFA program, which sounds like it's not a lot of work, but it's a lot of work. And I got an MFA, and before I even finished getting it, I was hired on at Fort Lewis College in Durango, and because we moved around a lot, and I taught there for most of the 90s. I taught writing there.
Great. Was it difficult to get published?
Another funny story. In 1970, I wrote, okay, I'm dating myself here. I wrote a poem called Eulogy for a Love Affair. And my roommate, a woman named Paula, read it and said, oh my God, you have to send this to Cosmo. So on the little piece of notebook paper, I tore it out of the notebook and I put it in an envelope and I sent it to Cosmopolitan. And a couple of weeks later, I got a check for $25. And they had made a copy, not even a Xerox, one of those old shiny copies, and they'd written "bye" on it, and they sent it to me. And of course, poetry is filler in Cosmopolitan, which I never read. I had never read Cosmopolitan. I didn't even know what it was. So about 8 or 9 years later, my late first mother-in-law, I have to make this very clear, my first mother-in-law, who died quite a number of years ago, was sitting under the hairdryer and is flipping through Cosmopolitan, and she finds in the back of the magazine a poem called Eulogy for a Love Affair by Lisa Lenard, her daughter-in-law. And the first line is, yesterday night making love to you was the same to me as brushing my teeth.
Oh, no.
And I had a hell of a time explaining to her that it was not about her son.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So that was my first experience, but after that, there was a long fallow period. I first started publishing again in the late 80s, early 90s with short stories. It takes me longer to write a short story than a novel. Publishing my first novel, it won a prize in manuscript. And as a result, when Beth Hattis, the then director of UNM Press, asked to see it, because it had won the prize, she read it more quickly than she might have otherwise. So I do recommend applying for the right prizes, because it does give you a leg up in very good ways. The other reason that she picked that one up first is it was the shortest stack on her desk.
Well, we all have writer's block at some time or another. How do you get through it?
Well, I have so much in my closet, my proverbial closet, at this point, that there's always something I can take out. I write a first draft very quickly, knowing that I'm going to put it in the closet. Homer said you should put a manuscript away for 7 years after you finish the first draft. And I think what he meant by that, I think he meant it metaphorically. I think what he meant by that was that you need to separate creator you from editor you. And so when you come back to a manuscript, you should have a fresh mind and a fresh eye so that you can revise it or rewrite it with what you know now that you didn't know then. So I think the best thing you can do for any manuscript is know that that's not going to be the holy writ, that you're going to put it away, and you're going to look at it later and pull things out and move things around and do everything that you might do. The novel that I just finished, again, I started 22 years ago. It was 2 different short stories. It became a novel for the first time in, I think, 1992. I have rewritten it from scratch, started over, you put away what I did before and started totally over. Same characters, but totally different conceptualization. 6 times. So this is the 6th rewrite of something I started 22 years ago. It's real close, but it's not quite there. So I put it away in my closet, and I plan on, in January, when it's dark and cold and snowy, taking it out again, reading it again, and seeing what it needs that I can't quite get to now. So patience is a huge part of the process. So the writer's block isn't really there for me anymore because I don't worry about audience that first time out. I'm just writing to find out what's in my head that first time.
That's good. Yeah. What advice do you have for writers breaking in or trying to break in?
Do your homework. Don't talk to or send letters out to every agent and editor, starting with A. Instead, find out what any particular agent or editor is looking for. They are people, not not vehicles there for you. You need to, when you talk to an agent or an editor, or write to an agent or editor, say, I am talking to you because you published X, and my book Y is similar to X in this way, and I think you are the right agent or editor for that book. You can't waste your time. You can't waste their time. You also need to think about where your fiction begins. Because if your fiction doesn't begin in the right place, the person you want to read it is not going to read past the first line.
Right, absolutely. Well, Lisa, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Doris.